Welcome to the First On Scene podcast from the Law Enforcement Death Response Team. Join us as we explore the experiences of first responders and their families. We will discuss some of the obstacles they face throughout their career and beyond, along with ways to stay healthy during and well after retirement. This podcast will provide resources for first responders and will share real-life stories to inspire and show the heroic strength we all have and can build on.
Hello, I'm Paul Butler. I'm a former chief of police at a small department and a chief deputy at a larger department in South Carolina. This podcast is brought to you by GoLawEnforcement.com. If you're looking to recruit highly qualified candidates for your agency, or you are looking for a job in law enforcement yourself, GoLawEnforcement.com has one of the largest and most popular listings of law enforcement job openings available on the market today. This particular podcast is presented by the Law Enforcement Death Response Team, or LEADER team. Folks, I've worked with these people on this team before, and it is a highly dedicated group of individuals who respond to all types of emergencies to help law enforcement deal with so many of the challenges, especially when that challenge involves the loss of life. For this story, I need you to know that in early June, I was contacted personally by a sergeant with the Tell City, Indiana Police Department, Sergeant Heather Glenn. She emailed me, and she told me about their department's struggle with a suicide by cop situation, where a citizen had committed a crime, pulled a gun on law enforcement, and then forced them to kill him. That had taken its toll on their small department. They're Midwest. They have those values. They have that kind of character, and they also show that kind of caring. And some of them ended up leaving the job, resigning, not because they'd done anything wrong, but because they just couldn't deal with some of the struggles of having taken that life. I want you to know that she wanted me to come and speak for them, and we were able to put it together incredibly quickly. At the end of June, I was able to make my way to Tell City, and we spoke. And I want you to know the people I met there had the best hearts. They're good people. They're close. They still believe in service, and they still believe in loving one another and giving all they have to give. I became friends with Sergeant Heather Glenn quickly, and it was going to be forever. I want you to know that about 48 hours after I left Tell City, during one of the most successful presentations I've ever had, it would involve their families and involved all on the staff, everyone in the neighboring agencies. We left there and we felt really good about everything in the future. But 48 hours later, I received a call from my friend Tracy in dispatch at Tell City, and she delivered some news that turned my world upside down. I realized that a lot of worlds were turned upside down that day.
My name is Derrick Lawalin. I'm the chief of police here for the Tell City Police. Tell City is a small town on the Ohio River, just on the border of Kentucky. It's what we know as home, and about 7,500 people live in the city. We are the county seat for Perry County, Indiana. We have 16 full-time sworn police officers, and we have the dispatch center for the county, so we have 10 full-time civilian employees. I would say that our crime is really low. We have issues with crystal methamphetamine, like a lot of other rural communities. July 2nd, 2023, I was made aware through conversation with our officers that they had been investigating a domestic violence incident. This particular incident had carried over from previous shifts. It was kind of an ongoing incident that our officers were handling. I remember that this particular incident really had our officers at a high alert based on the behavior and things that they had seen. And particularly Sergeant Heather Glenn was a primary investigator on this case. And I knew that she was particularly concerned about this case and an encounter with the alleged suspect in that matter. This was a domesticated partner where they have young children and things like that. My understanding was that the victim in this domestic was beaten severely, unlike some of the domestics that we see where it's far beyond being shoved or being held too tightly. This particular victim sustained significant injuries that required hospitalization. And the background of the alleged suspect was concerning. We were aware that he had a military background, and we were concerned of his state of mind at the time. We had found out after the fact that some of his family was concerned about him as well. I know the officers approached this incident with a heightened level of alertness or alarm, unlike the typical call. She had left the residence, went to her sister's home, and the officers took the report, and then they went to the house to attempt to arrest him, and he didn't come to the door if he was home. They made the decision at that time not to enter the home or anything like that. They knew that it would be too dangerous at that point. So their plan was to go ahead and investigate this further and prepare a case for review with our prosecutor. In the meantime, they learned that the victim had went to the hospital to be treated for her injuries. Her injuries were seemingly getting worse, and she was concerned that she needed to see a physician. And that's where this incident really took a real bad turn, was at that hospital. Sergeant Glenn was one of the officers that went up to take a photograph of the victim and take more information from her. I believe as Sergeant Glenn was there at the hospital speaking with the victim, whether it was based on what she said or her actions, kind of gave Sergeant Glenn the impression that maybe he may try to come there to the hospital. We know that Sergeant Glenn had notified hospital staff and the security there that this gentleman may try to come, and if he does, we need you to contact this dispatch so that we can have an officer come out. We know that Sergeant Glenn spoke with the other officers that were on the shift that night and told them the same thing, that I have a feeling that he may try to come to the hospital. I know that Sergeant Glenn did not have a conversation with him. She did not over the phone or anything. She didn't ask him to come to the hospital. I think she gathered that based on what the victim was saying. She waited there at the hospital for a while to see if he showed. He did not. She then left and at some point ended up back here at the Tell City Police Department. After she had got back here to the police department, she may have been here maybe 15 minutes, and dispatch did receive a call from our hospital staff that indicated that the person that Sergeant Glenn was referencing when she was there was at the hospital.
Central Dispatch. This is Perry County ER. We have a person here that the police were looking for, and we were told to call you if they showed up.
Oh, okay. We have an officer on the way. Thank you, ma'am.
So she had made a decision at that point to let the other officers know that we're working. Please start out towards the hospital. We're going to go out and try to apprehend this individual. Sergeant Glenn was the first on the scene. Sergeant Glenn was the supervisor that night, and I think she had really thought about what this approach should look like. I think she considered the possibility of him leaving before they got there. And there's a few different ways to access that hospital from our police station. So she had given the other two officers instructions. I want you to go this way and this officer to take this road. And I know that her intentions of doing that was that if he were to leave, they would have him covered no matter which way he went. But I also believe that, knowing Sergeant Glenn the way that I did, I believe that she wanted to be the first officer there. She kind of led the way. So it's without question that that was part of her intentions, was to be the first person there. When Sergeant Glenn arrived, she radioed that she noted his vehicle was in the parking lot. She made reference to that to the other officers and let them know that he is still here. She had parked her cruiser just outside the main entrance of what we would call the emergency room waiting area. And immediately when she walked in, the other gentleman in question was there. He was kind of standing there waiting. He seemed to be somewhat calm, yet maybe anxious a little bit. And she tried to engage with him and tried to get him to cuff up and surrender. She explained to him that she was going to place him under arrest for this domestic violence incident. And she immediately was encountered with resistance. He would not follow her orders and started to walk away from her at different times. And Sergeant Glenn knew that the other officers were coming. She was trying to get the situation under control, at least until the other officers could get there. The other two officers, as they were walking into the area, the waiting room area, the gentleman at this point had resisted to the point that he had turned and was trying to walk down the hallway away from Sergeant Glenn. Sergeant Glenn was giving him orders with her taser drawn. She had given him multiple commands to stop and cuff up, and he just disobeyed each order and refused to cooperate. She deployed her taser one time. It kind of caused him to turn, and it appeared, based on the surveillance and things that I've watched with this, it appeared that he almost instantaneously had grabbed his shirt and pulled his shirt out real quickly, almost like he studied for this. This is what I'm going to do if this happens. He did it very fast, and that caused the taser probes to become dislodged, which rendered the taser ineffective at that point. Sergeant Glenn was very tactical with her taser. She's a taser instructor for our agency. She knew her way around that weapon very well. So she gave him another command and deployed a second round from that taser. Almost immediately as she did that, the gentleman was able to turn very quickly and produce a firearm from his waist, and that's when he opened fire on Sergeant Glenn. The two officers had gotten there at that point. The situation became a little bit of a tactical mess, I guess you would say, in a hallway. Sergeant Glenn she's very courageous. She was advancing this gentleman to take control of him, and that placed her between the officers and the suspect. As soon as the opportunity presented itself, which was seconds, if not split seconds, both officers returned fire and fatally struck the suspect.
Shot fire, shot fire. Shot fire, shot fire. 62-5, 62-23, request you signal Perry County Memorial Hospital in reference to shots fired.
Sergeant Glenn was struck multiple times. I think the number may be 8 times. We know that she was fatally struck with the second round, which gave us all some peace and comfort, knowing that she didn't suffer. We feel like she was able to make contact with his weapon and kind of move it off course a little bit, which caused one of the rounds to miss, the very first round. But then the second round was a fatal hit to her. Sergeant Glenn actually had arms on him as she was struck. Sergeant Glenn would have been pronounced deceased maybe within 8 minutes of the shooting. We know now after the autopsy that she was killed instantly, but they exhausted all efforts to try to do anything they could for her before they pronounced it. I guess you would say kind of started for us on the night before, the evening of July 2nd, 2023. My family, each year we have a 4th of July get-together, and it was a rainy day, and we almost canceled it, and we decided to keep it, which I'm so glad we did. And so all of my family was together, and Heather was more than a coworker. She was like a part of my family, and we had invited her to come up to eat with us. And so 10 o'clock that night, she's at her house. We always invite her. She came, and she had a intern with her that night that was riding with her, but she came up and enjoyed dinner with us, and she got an alarm call while she was there and had to leave. She had mentioned to me even that night that she was still investigating this domestic, and I don't recall exactly what she had said, but she had told me that this was a bad one. This was a bad domestic, and she was a very seasoned officer, so for her to say that really kind of stood out to me. So she left maybe 10 o'clock. She had left to go on about her shift, and we'd kind of cleaned up there at her house, and I'd taken a shower and just kind of settled into bed, and I had gotten to sleep finally. And about 12:50 a.m., my cell phone rang. I answered it, and it was one of our dispatchers here at our police station. And I immediately detected that this dispatcher was in somewhat of a panic. She was very clear with her words, yet I could tell that something serious was happening. What I recall hearing her say was that I think I was in somewhat disbelief, but I remember her saying something like Heather, Sergeant Glenn was there investigating this domestic, and now they're getting reports of shots fired.
ISP through NMA, tell them shots fired at Perry County Memorial Hospital and get them en route now.
Hello?
Hey, Derrick, I believe there's shots fired at Perry County Memorial Hospital right now. Heather's up there now. It was a domestic that occurred over last night.
All right. I'll head up there.
Okay, I'm getting ISP en route, and they're all going up there now, okay?
All right.
All right, bye.
Tell City 23, what's the call up here? We don't know what's going on.
23, it's going to be resulting from the domestic that happened last night. The female subject was in the ER, and now the male subject is up there. ISP, go ahead.
1043, I have 2 officers in that. I believe both of them coming from Jasper. 1043.
Tell City 65, we'll need a supervisor as well.
I need you guys to send as many possible units as you can, please, and thank you. ISP to Tell City.
Go for ISP.
Just 1043, suspect is down. We do have an officer that has been struck.
Sorry, 1 officer struck. Perry County, can you 10-9 your truck?
I need multiple supervisor and sergeant here now.
1 officer down.
So I immediately sprung out of bed. I don't know how long it took. It seemed like seconds, but I guess you kind of prepare yourself for these kind of things to some extent as far as deploying quickly. But I was able to get to my gear and get to my clothes pretty quick and was out the door. And I remember my wife was kind of chasing me through the house. What's going on? What's going on? She could tell something was wrong. And she sees me get up a lot because here in our community, when something serious happens, it's a team effort. I'm out, our detectives are out, our off-duty patrol officers are out. We had an incident, an officer-involved shooting last November, and that was very fresh on everybody's mind at the time. That was our first officer-involved shooting that we've had in the history of the agency that I'm aware of. So that has to affect our wives and everybody to see us in a panic state. I just told my wife, I said, I don't know. I said, I'm going to the hospital. There's been shots fired. And I didn't really know that much, but I got out the door quick. And at some point, I remember our body cameras have a feature to where if they go from a vertical state to a horizontal state and don't get corrected quickly, it sends an alert to all of our text messages. So I got that body worn down, that officer down alert on my phone. I think I got the first alert as I was getting ready to walk out of my house. And I know that it was Heather's camera. But I think that I was at that point somewhat disbelief. And we get those alerts quite a bit. One officer may take their vest off and forget to go off duty and their camera thinks that it's down. I mean, we get them even when we're searching cars if we don't go upright. So I didn't immediately accept or think the worst. It's about a 2-minute drive from my house to the Perry County Memorial Hospital. So it was a very short trip. And during that drive there, I got the second alert from Heather's camera. Prior to walking through those doors, I don't think that I had even imagined that Heather was down, even though those alerts came through. When I pulled up, I saw Heather's car sitting there. I saw the second Tell City PD car there, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary at the time. When I walked into a complete nightmare. Immediately in the front, when you walk in the first doors, you're in that waiting room. And I know that you're usually greeted with someone sitting at the admin desk, and there was nobody there. And I look down the hall, and I see 2 of our officers. One of them, a Tell City officer, and the other one was a Cannleton PD officer, which is the next town over. And those 2 officers was just unlike anything I've ever seen before. Their body language, the look on their face, I knew that something horrific had just occurred. And I looked and I seen the gentleman at the end of the hall that was down. I advanced down the hallway towards our officer. And as I got closer to the gentleman, I could tell that he was deceased. And I asked our officer, I said, what is going on? And he said he pulled a gun on us. He pulled a gun, and he said he hit Heather hard. And it was at that time that I realized that where's Heather? Where's she at in this? And he said they drug her off. And at that moment, I turned and looked, and I could see the drag marks with blood going around the corner towards the car doors. And I just looked at my officer and I said, "Are you okay? Do you need me here right now?" He said, "No, we're fine." And I knew there was other officers coming. So I immediately advanced towards the emergency room doors, which were secured. And I was just frantically trying to gain access. And luckily, one of the employees saw I was trying to get in. So she opened the door for me. And I could essentially follow the blood down the hall to the triage room where Heather was. And when I walked down the hall, I could see that they were actively trying to save Heather's life. They were doing chest compressions, and a nurse was actually on. I never forget that she was on Heather, kind of straddling her, doing chest compressions. And when I think that was at that moment that I thought, this is real. This is really happening, even though it felt like a dream. And I was just trying to get myself together. Like, is this real? How am I going to do this? What do I need to do now? And I just kept going towards the room. And at that point, they had multiple people in that room doing everything they could. And I remember listening and, what can I do to help? And what can I do at this point? Do I need to get in there and try to do chest compressions? What do I need to do? And I felt all alone. I was the only law enforcement person there right at that moment. When I heard them talking about blood, we need blood. And we have a database that we use here that allows us to record information, emergency information on our staff. And one of the things that we record and keep is our blood types. So I was thinking, okay, I need to find out what Heather's blood type is. And so I start getting on my phone and trying to get to the side, and which is just like three buttons, three pushes away. And it was like I couldn't get my phone to do what I wanted to do. And it was the cell signal, I guess, was poor enough. It was taking too long to get that information. And so it was just a helpless feeling to see that and not be able to fix it. I think the priority first for me was to see if there's any information that I had that might help the doctors. I didn't want to accept that death was an option. Even though I think I knew, based on what I've seen that scene too many times where you could tell that the efforts were there, but the signs weren't showing life. So I think the priority was first and foremost to see if there was anything I could do at that moment to help save her life. And then secondly, once they called it, they come out of the room and they looked at me, and I could just tell that they were devastated as well. And I knew at that point that I had to accept this, that now we have to get ready for the next step. I know that there were some other colleagues that started to arrive at that time. I think the sheriff of our county seems like he may have been one of the next ones that kind of come in. And I kind of found myself on my knees praying and just trying to figure out what to do. And I think that the priority at that point for me was to just be there with Heather. The room had cleared, and it was just me and her at that point. As other people started to come, they were looking to me. What can I do? What should I do? And I think I can honestly say that I didn't know. Looking back on it, I think we did all the right things, but this would have been 1 a.m. to 1:30. And to go from asleep to just a complete nightmare and trying to answer all those questions and make all those decisions, it was a process that I had never went through before to that regard. As far as the type of roles that were necessary to address, each of those things started to come to mind. I knew we had a crime scene. I knew we had another person that was involved in this. I knew that one of my officers had discharged their weapon and that there's protocols and things for that. As soon as we started to get more officers there, I immediately started delegating. I knew that I had some real important things here. I had one officer go back to the officer that worked for us that had returned fire. And we had went through this just months prior. So I knew it was very important for us to get somebody to that officer and help him through his process as well. So I made sure that happened. I knew that this type of incident in a community like Tell City and Perry County, it was not going to take long for it to get out when the social media and whatnot. And Heather was a very well-known person in our community, born and raised here. Everyone knew her. Everyone respected her. And I knew that we needed to make the right notifications at the right time and in the right way. So the crime scene part, I think that what helped was that because it was in the middle of the night, there was not a whole lot of people there. We were able to secure the facility, not let anybody in. We immediately requested the assistance of the Indiana State Police, which is protocol on an incident like this. They have a delayed response time for their crime scene techs to come, so we knew that it may be 45 minutes to an hour before they get there. So it was a lot of securing and just making sure that nobody comes and goes and that type of thing. I think, again, I go back to say that one of my most important roles, I think, early on was the notification. I called our assistant chief and one of our lieutenants, and I didn't tell them what happened. I just said, I need you at the hospital. And I think they could tell. They knew that there was something terrible had happened. They both arrived within minutes, it seemed like, of each other. And I remember having them come in the room with me and Heather, and I said, look, guys, I said, we need to go and tell Bob and Jane. And I said, I can tell you that I feel like that's my job. I need to be the person to do that. This is one of my best friends. And Bob and Jane are like family to me. And I said, I feel like I know that's me that needs to do that. But I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stay here with Heather. I can't leave her. So those two guys said, we get it, Chief. We're going to do it. We'll do it. And so they drove over to Bob and Jane's, and I told them, I said, guys, I said, we got to get this right. This is going to be hard. This is their only daughter, and I knew that they would have questions, and we didn't have a lot of answers, and I didn't know how that process would go, but they went and did that, and they came back what seemed like 15 minutes later and told me, they said they're aware and the sheriff is there with them and the sheriff is going to stay with them. And they said they want to come here. They want to see her. And I thought, I don't know if I was ready for that request. I mean, looking back on it, I can understand them wanting to come there, especially Bob being a police officer himself for years. At this time, there's starting to be some state police personnel arriving. And I was still just trying to wrap my head around everything and understand everything that happened. And the sheriff had called me on the phone and he said, Chief, he said, Bob and Jane want to come and they want to see their daughter. I knew immediately, I'm like, I don't think they do. I don't think they want to see her right now because I was with her and I saw her and I didn't want them to see her like that. And he kind of said, I don't think they're going to take no for an answer. And one of the state police colleagues that has been in our area for a long time, he's a supervisor, he was standing next to me and he could hear this phone conversation. And he says, tell you what, he said, I'm going to make that decision so you don't have to. He said, we're not going to have them see their daughter right now. He said, if they want to come here and speak with the chaplain outside or whatever, we can make those arrangements. But this is a crime scene. And he said, I'll take that burden off your back. He said, we're not going to allow them to come in this room and see her right now, which I think was a good call. The next row after the family was notified was I knew that our officers were going to have to learn about this. And it's just to really understand that, the magnitude of that, you just have to understand the dynamics of a police department like this. I mean, such a small agency. And all these guys are just friends. And so whenever the lieutenant got back, I said, okay, your next job, I need you to get a hold of these guys. And just however you got to do it. I don't want them to hear about it any other way. I want them to hear it from you. And some of them are showing up already. That's just how we do it. These night shift guys are up on their nights off and they're hearing this stuff and they're showing up without being asked. And that's just the kind of officers we have. But we had others that were on vacation. We had an officer that was a close friend of Heather's that worked with her for years. Him and his family were getting ready to step onto a cruise ship when he got that call. And he looked at his family. He said, we're going back to Tell City without hesitation. And that's what they did. I was trying to think about everybody, trying to think about our team and knowing that this news was going to be unlike anything they've ever heard. So, I just thankful that I had those guys that could take on those roles and allow me to be there with Heather. That was important to me. I started hearing from representatives of the Indiana State FOP Memorial Team. I couldn't believe how quick that started. I didn't answer. It was a voicemail, and I remember Joe Hamer being the person that left me a voicemail. I did not know Joe. That was the first time I'd ever heard that man's voice. And he told me, he said, I'm sorry that I'm making this call, and I know that you're going through a lot of tasks right now, and you don't have time to talk to me right now, but I want to let you know that I'm on my way, and that he was coming from the northern part of the state. So obviously had an extended drive, but he assured me in that little message that I got that I'm on my way and we're going to get through this. We're going to be there for you and we're going to help you through this. And I think that was my first sign of knowing that we're not going to have to do this by ourselves. This is something that none of us has ever done before. So that resource was phenomenal. And then it only, as the day went on, it just became more and more apparent how strong that it's unfortunate they are as good as they are, because that just means they have to do it too much. We were told that by the FOP representative that had called that one of the things that was very important before they got there was to make sure that flag accompanies her body each time she's moved. And so we had to get a flag. That wasn't something that we carried. And one of our officers said, "I'll be right back." And he went to a school that was short distance from there. And I guess you wouldn't call it a theft, but he somehow left there with a flag. And one of those things where it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, I guess. But nonetheless, he came back with a flag. And so those were things that I didn't realize at the time of the task that we had to do. The officers, the sheriff's office, and everybody that was in Perry County that had a badge was there. And even some that were retired had come and said, "What can we do to help?" Once we got her to the coroner's office, we knew that we needed to surround ourselves with each other for support, and we gathered at a church. And by this time, it's 2 a.m., 2:30 in the morning, and families and all the officers and wives and children gathering into this church. And it seemed like it was the next day, but it was all within hours. The way it all went so fast. And that was the first time that I started seeing the officers, because my focus was with Heather. I was in with her the whole time, and now I'm seeing the officers for the first time and just seeing how hurt they were, and it was tough. But I knew that at that church, everybody was, whether they were or not, I felt like that everybody was looking at me to be a leader. And I knew that that was a big job that I had and that I take very serious. And so I mustered up the courage and got myself together enough to address that group and tell them, "Look, we're going to be okay. We're all going to get through this. We've got some heavy burdens ahead of us, and this is going to be something that we've never dealt with before, but we're going to do this." And Heather wouldn't have wanted any other way. And it was really important to me to show them that I had confidence in all of them, that we were all going to be able to do this together. We had a community that was hurting, and that they were looking for us in the same regard to know that everything's going to be okay. And I felt that was a responsibility that I had as well. Once we kind of did everything we could for that time being, I knew that we had to have a press conference. The state police had told me that the news medias were on their way. Everybody was kind of waking up and hearing about what had happened. And the PIO of the Indiana State Police told me, he said, "Chief, that they're coming here to the police station. They're going to be here at such and such time, and they're going to do a live press conference at the police station." I think it was one of the officers said, "Well, why don't you let their PIO do that?" And I thought about it, and I thought, I'm the chief of police of this town, and I feel like that's the duty that I have, is to stand there and address these folks and let them know that we're going to be okay. That's something that they needed to hear from me, and that was my responsibility. So I somehow mustered up the energy to go put a Class A uniform on and get myself awake and squared away enough to be down here in front of the camera to do that. Well, then as the day went on, I think that the support and resources at that point really started to roll in. I had a colleague that reached out to me. He's from Tell City, and he worked at this agency for some time, and he's now a deputy chief in Avon, Indiana, which is up near Indianapolis. Good friend of mine, named Brian Nugent. He called me and he said, "Hey, man," he said, "I'm on my way." And I said, "Brian," I said, I appreciate it. I said, "We've got guys here." I said, "Do what you need to do." I said, "Please." He said, "No." He said, "I'm on my way." He said, "I don't care what you need me to do." He said, "I'm going to do whatever it is." And I knew that, that there was just a mound of things that was happening. Everybody started reaching out. What can we do to help? What can we do? And when Brian arrived in Tell City, one of the things that he did for me as a resource that ended up being a tremendous help was he said, "Why don't you let me take the media off your hands? Give me access to your social media accounts. Let me be the person that answers your questions. And I won't do anything without talking to you first." Man, that was a big help. He took care of getting all that press releases out and informing the media and the public about the stages and the escorts and all the things, the funeral arrangements and all the things that were unfolding. That was a big help. This was her life. She didn't have children. She wasn't married. And she considered it her biggest responsibility and to take care of other people. She was better at that than anybody I've ever met. And I think that knowing that she had those struggles in her life and with depression and whatnot, and she had this opportunity to go to that call that night and be the first one in the door and to put her courage on display. And in doing so, she saved the lives of other police officers and other people in the hospital that night. There's no doubt in my mind through this investigation that she was the one that basically intercepted his plans, and there's no question. So Heather gets to leave this world a hero. And even though she would never want to be called that, she was okay being that person.
I hope you found a great deal of benefit in listening to this episode. And I certainly hope that you will join me in appreciating the courage it takes for my dear friend, Chief Lawalin, to talk about those very sensitive moments. Folks, these are very difficult times, and it requires great leadership to step forward and lead us into the unknown. I ask you to be that kind of leader, the one who steps up and does things that others are unsure about. If you want to hear more about the Sergeant Heather Glenn story and how I became involved in that, you can listen to my podcast episode on the First on the Scene podcast. It's titled Unlocking Your Inner Leader. There I discuss some of the things that can go wrong in our lives, but how we can always bring something good out of it if we try hard together and never give up on believing that tomorrow brings a brighter day.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the First on Scene podcast from the Law Enforcement Death Response Team. If you did, please subscribe. Also check out the listings of law enforcement job openings on golawenforcement.com. Thanks for listening.